Hotep. I'm Dr. Gloria L, host and producer of OmniU Presents the H3O Art of Life show. Today, my guest is my long-awaited mentor, Wayne Sebamurti Gentry. I'd love to greet you, and I'm so happy to have you here. And I want the audience to know that the title of today's show is Spiritual Healing, an Inside Job. So we're going to talk a lot about the things you have to do on the inner plane in order to contribute to your healing spiritually as well as in other modes of being.
Thank you. You're an honor for having me as your guest, Dr. Peace.
So you go right ahead and launch into the opening statement.
Okay. It's Spiritual Healing, an Inside Job. That's a great title because it's definitely an inside job. And the major work that needs to be done is in the form of meditation. And in fact, the word meditation is very connected to healing because the root word in meditation, which is medi, is the same root word that is used in medicine. And of course, you know, substances that are used in the healing process to restore one's health is called medicine. And the medi, it comes from the Latin word medicari, I think that's it, medicari. And meditation is a healing from within. In fact, I like to speak about that word in two different ways because in Sanskrit, the term dhyana is used for meditation. And that is a term that's used for seeing, inward seeing. Whereas when you are looking outward and seeing things in an outward sense, a term that is used for that is like evidence, seeing the evidence of phenomenal things. There is no evidence of seeing inward. The word that we use is insight. So meditation as dhyana is used for getting insight, seeing inward into the interiority of your being. And so it's two ways that meditation is to be understood: as a healing in that it is restoring wholeness, and as a seeing inward into the depths of your being. And it's interesting that meditation and medicine as healing is something that we resort to restore wholeness. And it's not something that, like here in the West, the modern people responsible for establishing the understanding of phenomenal things, understanding of things that are referred to as religious, not so much spiritual. There's not much spirituality really here being practiced in the West in a popular sense. It's more religious. There's a difference between religious and spirituality.
You need to stop and make that distinction, I think.
This distinction is that religious worship and practice has more of a dualism involved in terms of there being something that exists as a higher reality that is separate from you, and that you are to worship and that you are to give service to that which is separate from you, and that the divinity or divineness of the various religions exists outside of yourself. And at best, what you can have is a relationship with the divine. Whereas in spirituality, there is no distinction between the inner and the outer. And it's not so much that you are to establish a relationship with the divine, but you are to awaken to the divine that resides within. And in a sense,
the kingdom of God is within.
The kingdom of God is within. So it's more of recognition and an identification with God instead of having a relationship with God that is believed to be outside of yourself. It's not an inside-outside. It's a reality that is transcendental, immanent, and immanent. But the way to awaken to that reality is through an inward journey, and meditation is the key component and process that is resorted to for such an awakening.
So therefore, people get confused when I call it the geography of God, meaning that the locus, the location of God is always seen as some distant place where you will arrive upon death, not a place, not a state rather than a place, not a state of being where I and the Father are one. Now, people who do practice Christianity will listen to Jesus say, I and the Father are one, but will not heed the kingdom of God is within. The kingdom of God is at hand. I mean, how many references do we need from the person who, or the divinity whom we worship? How many times does that divinity have to tell you that if you are looking outside of yourself, you are looking away from where you need to be looking in order to find the kingdom of God, because the kingdom of God is within. The geography is within, and you cannot arrive at that state when you are always attending to things outside yourself. When you are busy, when your attention is diverted away from your interior, so that you cannot listen, you cannot hear the inner voice.
That's one of the things that meditation is designed to do. Meditation is designed to bring stillness and silence to the mind, because the mind is looking outward for consolation, for happiness, for pleasure, for gratification, for safety, for security, and all of these things are not existent in any outward objective phenomenal sense. So meditation is coming to understand that who you are as a being is beyond and encompasses more than your mind. Your mind is a vehicle. It is something that is used by the being of who you are.
It's an instrument.
It's an instrument. It is not who you are. But when your consciousness has not been healed, when your consciousness has not integrated its centers, then there is a misidentification with the components of your being. You can become misidentified with the mind component and think that who you are is a thinking being only and not a spiritual being. But the way to come to a realization of that is through the practice of meditation. Because meditation, what it does is bringing stillness and silence to the mind. It opens you up, and that's where the insight comes. Because the mind, the function of the mind is to create representations of the reality of your experience, of your perceptions. But you can get lost into thinking that what is being represented is the thing itself, and then become identified as such. There's a projection that goes on also from your psychic. There are not much clarity that exists in the Western way of how everybody has become educated into an understanding of Eastern and esoteric teachings. So it kind of gets gray, and it gets a little cloudy in terms of understanding what spiritual teachings are aiming at and what the real focus is supposed to be, because we become acclimated to think along linear lines, sequentially, and that gets in the way. So meditation and spiritual practices help to make a shift from being more oriented in your left hemisphere of your brain to your right hemisphere of your brain.
And then talk about the left hemisphere and what it does. It analyzes, it compartmentalizes, it separates endlessly down to subatomic particles, because that is the function of that hemisphere.
Right.
Is always to be breaking down, and never synthesizing, never bringing together, never unifying,
Right.
never making whole,
Right.
but always continuing to separate and to distinguish and to differentiate until there is actually nothing left to differentiate, because you have taken away any sense of identity that could be found by continuing to separate until there is no essence.
Right, right, exactly. Linearizing, analytical, all of these things are what sequential thinking. All of these things are what the left hemisphere of the brain is inclined to do. And we're born in some sense with the greater portion of our energies and our inclinations to function polarized in that left hemisphere. And there are certain things that we employ in our maturation process which is supposed to open up and connect with the right hemisphere and balance the two. And this is where meditation and music comes in, because a musician's corpus callosum, and that's the portion of the brain that connects the two hemispheres and allows for the communication and exchange of information.
Mm-hmm.
A musician's corpus callosum is much thicker than an average person's who does not engage in any music or singing than their corpus callosum. And this is why in ancient times it was a part of the study and the science of human development that music had to be a part of the curriculum. It was not an extra added on something that was optional. It was a part of it because they understood that it has direct effect on the physical changes of your brain. In fact, there have been studies done in Harvard and in Yale. One in Harvard in the year 2011 under the direction of Sarah Lazar, where it was shown concrete evidence, because now we have the ability to see the geography of the brain's electrical activity that's going on, and we can actually see the enlargements or the shrinking areas of the brain in related to certain activities that are engaged in. Where there were studies done in Harvard which showed that meditation actually physically changes areas in your brain associated with self-awareness, compassion, and having the ability to maintain a focus on what you are doing in the here and now. That these areas of your brain are actually enlarging, and there's more gray matter seen in these areas of the brain by people who have committed to a meditation practice consistently for several months. So meditation physically changes the brain, which allows now for a greater expression of the consciousness, which is not housed in the brain, but the brain is used as a way of expressing the consciousness that exists in a universal sense. It becomes a little difficult in language and trying to speak about these matters in a way that perhaps it will be most familiar with,
Well,
with people.
here's something that I think people are familiar with, and they certainly could relate to it. When you said that the inclination, there's an inclination to function out of that left hemisphere, where all this reasoning and deduction and analysis is going on. We also have an educational system that is based on the conditioning and training of this hemisphere, so that the inclination is there, and then it is enhanced
And fed.
and exactly by a system that sees to it that it dominates the other hemisphere, to the extent that the right hemisphere, which is the hemisphere that is the affective side of the brain, the one that feels, the one where compassion is a part, where love, where the virtues arise, that is minimized, it is dominated, it is submerged into all this analysis, and consequently, we are not only unbalanced, but we are also dehumanized in some sense, because human beings must have balance, but by all means, they must have the side of the brain that deals with the affective side, that most human of the human aspects, that must be active and alert and available. And when it is not, then you get sociopaths, you get people who can do inhumane things and have no remorse and no regret, because they cannot empathize.
Exactly.
They cannot put their feet in somebody else's moccasins. They simply cannot see your suffering.
Right.
They cannot comprehend your hardship or what their behavior is imposing on you.
Right, because there's an arrested development that has taken place. And that arrested development is an ongoing process that's being fostered by the institutions that are really miseducating people in the name of education by focusing in on the left hemisphere, mainly on the left hemisphere, mainly because also those who are responsible for the creation of the institutions that has generated this Western society, they have not understood the inside job of what we're speaking about in terms of meditation and bringing balance and wholeness to who you are as a whole human being, and which would allow for your empathy. Remember, as I said earlier, they proven through research and study in Harvard that meditation actually enlarges the part of the brain that allows you to empathize, for compassion, and for self-awareness. This left hemisphere of the brain makes you more material-oriented. It makes you more outward searching, too, for things in terms of peace and happiness, because we all are in search of peace, and we're in search of happiness, but those things reside inside of yourself. There's not a commodity. There's not anything that you can buy that's going to make you happy. Happiness is your nature, is who you are. But if you are focused in your left hemisphere, and that's being bred by the institutions here in this Western society, then you're going to believe that happiness is something that is obtained through outward means, that you got to have a lot of money to be happy, that you got to have a combination of people.
Then we see that that is not true, because we see people with a lot of money commit suicide.
Exactly.
We see people with a lot of money suffer. We see people with a lot of money get caught up in addictions because their lot of money is imposing burdens on them that they need to anesthetize themselves so that they can escape from the possession of the burdens that they impose upon themselves. But I think that institutions come from the people. And if the people are themselves left-brained, if the people themselves value the ability to analyze, and that is not to say that you don't want to have the ability to analyze, but you don't want to have it to the exclusion of the ability to love.
Right.
You don't want to, you don't, it's not either or. You know, either you can have the ability to analyze or you cannot have it. You can, it's both and.
Right.
You can have both at the same time. And it is better for you if you have them both, because then you are a whole human being.
Right. And that's where the healing comes in. Mm-hmm. That's what healing is, restoration to wholeness.
Right.
And that's why meditation is so important in that whole process of restoring wholeness. And we're beginning to see meditation on a rise in a lot of different areas in this society because of the result of certain studies that have been done to show the benefits and the proof of the benefits of meditation, how it affects you physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And so there will be some change, but the interesting thing about it is that meditation is also something that is like an activity that is a psychic revolution. The change is not something that is gradual, evolutionary. It's more revolutionary. And revolution is immediate change, things that must take place now. And I say that because now in the West, we also believe that the vast majority of the people believe that you only live once. You only have one life that you live. And when this life is over, that's it. There was nothing before. There's only some hope for rewards afterwards in some place, or hope for having lived a life that affords you not to be punished in a certain place. But the truth is that we have lived many, many, many lives before this life. And the aim and purpose of life is to know thyself, to know who you are. You hear, we are conscious beings. We are human beings, Homo sapiens sapiens, mankind who knows that he knows. So your purpose in life is to know the knower, to know that which knows, to know this life. Across many, many lifetimes, we have been attempting to attain this goal. Meditation is a spiritual technology that you can employ to quicken that goal. I say technology because that's what technology does. Technology is that which is resorted to quicken the attainment of a goal and to get great efficiency out of the usage of something. It's a spiritual technology because with the employment of meditation now, you can accelerate your awareness to the point where you can obtain the goal of knowing thyself in a single lifetime that is now. And in the extent that you do that, you have engaged in psychic revolution because you have broke free from evolving through a life to life to life to lifetime sense to obtaining enlightenment awareness of who you are in a single lifetime. And this is the goal of all of our lives. But unbeknownst to many, they don't know that.
It is, the hardest thing to convince anybody of is that they know themselves, that they don't know themselves. If you ask anybody who they are, they will give you an obituary. The only thing that's missing is the date on which this body ceases to function on this plane. Mm-hmm. But they will begin as far back as they can, and they will tell you who their parents were, perhaps other members of the family, where they went to school, where they worked, who they married, who their children were, what job they hold now if they do, what hobbies they engage in. They will tell you all of these external things, all of these things that come as a result of being in this body, in this incarnation. Their beginning will be on their birthday, and they will celebrate their birthday as their beginning, and they will also celebrate the homegoing as the ending. And you cannot get past most people in a discussion about who they are without going through this autobiography, sometimes even poorly remembered autobiography, as though that is who they really are. It never occurs to them to ask the question, or if it does, it doesn't do anything earth-shaking. Where were you the day before, or the hour or the minute before you were born? Then they will say, you know, I was in my mother's womb, and then you ask where you were before that, and they will tell you in the ova and the father's sperm, and then you ask where your mother was before she had ova, you know, for a father before he had sperm. And they will go back into their grandmother, and they will go back generations until they run out of generations to go back to, but they know that there had to be something beyond that, even if their memory won't take them there. So there are points beyond which we cannot even go in trying to recollect this person that we think we are. But even that tells you that you always were, because you could not have been in your mother's womb if you had not been present somewhere in order to be in your mother's ova, and to be in your mother before your mother had ova, before your mother had being. So it's not hard to convince people that there was a presence. But they never listened to their own mentors who said resurrection. I mean, what do you do with resurrection? If that is not life beyond the activity or the event of death, what is resurrection? And is resurrection only reserved for the one divine being? Well, even if that is so, that one divine being said the kingdom of God is in you. So you cannot ignore all these glaring clues that are sitting in your sacred books that tell you that you are not looking deep enough or hard enough or long enough to find out who you are.
See, because they have to do an inside job looking. That's meditation. See, and there is a logion in the Gnostic Gospels which says, look to yourself and see if you have yet resurrection. Look to yourself to see if you have yet resurrected. So everything is about who you are as this life that has always existed, always will exist. See, most people don't understand what life is. They identify with forms. So they think they give you an account of from birth to death because that's the beginning and the ending of
form.
the form, of the form coming into being. But this form that we have become misidentified with.
But that is only one form.
All right, but that form.
In your mother's ova, you were not a fetus. You were not an embryo.
Right.
So there are stages of form.
Right. But there's a misidentification that takes place with the consciousness, with the form. And this is also why meditation and study has to be done to recover what was lost. There is a forgetting that takes place when you are born. Being that this life is one. This life is one, expressing itself in a variety of forms. There is a forgetting that takes place, which is a necessary forgetting,
yes,
in order for there to be
the form.
The form and the variety of experiences within creation. Mm-hmm. The way it is spoken about may get a little deep. I want to take an opportunity to share this. The way it is spoken about in the spiritual teachings of Kashmir Shaivism, that the ultimate supreme reality being one. And this Kashmir Shaivism teacher also came into being through the same mind that birthed Kemet, spirituality. So these are the same people. That there's one ultimate reality, being a singular reality, there's no distinctions. There's no differences. There is no other. There is nothing that can be spoken of in any kind of knowing sense.
There is no thing.
No thing.
Yes.
There's no thing.
No thing.
So being that there's just this one singular reality, all there is this. In order for there to be an experience of otherness, of a creation, a phenomenal world coming into being, this one ultimate reality, and these words are just descriptions.
Right.
That's all we can do when speaking of this, is pointing toward it, had to put a limitation on itself, a self-imposing limitation on its own reality, to experience a sense of otherness. And then this experience of otherness now, which is still experience of itself now, become a sense of veils on its own identity as being a singular reality. And now there's an appearance of there being many and otherness. The one becoming the many. But the many and the variety of forms is just an appearance. This is not an actuality of something as being an independent reality of separate things. Now, so that is a necessary experience of otherness. However, there's supposed to be a journeying back of this one singular reality, which created its own self-imposed limitations on the experience of itself to become the many. There's a journeying back toward the oneness. And knowing
unity.
Thyself as that no thing. Mm-hmm. That is what we as human beings are supposed to be experiencing. We're supposed to be having that journey back to knowing thyself as that. Knowing thyself as this ultimate reality. Mm-hmm. And all of the spiritual teachings that the sages, which are known to be a mouthpiece of this spiritual reality, this is what they say. I and the Father are one. Mm-hmm. Who have seen me have seen the Father. Mm-hmm. The kingdom of heaven is within. you are no different from me. That there is this oneness that is the reality. And in so much that you are not aware of that, the purpose of your life is to recover that awareness. And meditation is key and principle in that recovery. And it is a healing in the sense that you are now bringing balance, bringing wholeness to yourself as a being that's expressing as a human being. That your humanity is just an expression of who you are. Because who you are as this life, as you said earlier, existed prior to the womb and will exist after the tomb. And when you engage in meditation practice, this become a reality to you. It is not something that's theoretical, something that you may have read in a book and you have now made it a part of your understanding that you can articulate. You actually have real experiences of realizing and recognizing this oneness.
And that is the only way you can realize and recognize, because the difficulty, as you pointed out, not only here but so often, is articulating. There is a point beyond which the language cannot go, the mind cannot go. There is a point beyond which you get to that point and you recognize that there is more to be said, more to be thought, more to be realized, but you cannot do it by ordinary means. You cannot do it. When you read, the earth was void and without form, if you think about that, how could the earth be the earth if it had no form? The only way we understand the earth is that globe that we see with the continents and the waters all sprinkled on it. We cannot imagine an earth without form. Who is this and what is this that realizes that there is a plane that has no form but can be realized, can be seen, and not with eyes, but can be apprehended? The earth was without form. How do you have an earth? You don't have an earth until you have form, if you are looking at it with these eyes.
With these eyes, right.
So here is the earth without form. And our ancestors would say a foundation had to be put, which was Ma'at. Because there would be nothing on which to erect anything, because the earth was without form. So first of all, our ancestors erected a foundation with all of the principles of Ma'at, justice and truth and beauty and all of the virtues. That was the foundation, not the physical.
Right.
So when people want to run right through scriptures and act as though they have examined them, but if you're going to do Bible study, then you're going to have to also do some really heavy reflection and meditation, because your language is not sufficient.
Right. Right.
You have not been no one can teach you enough to use this brain to unwrap and unveil all those layers that are between you and this understanding. And that is when you are all struck. You realize, I cannot imagine the earth without form. I don't know how to do that. But it's there in the sacred writings that the earth had existence without form. So there is the possibility that something can be without form. Oh.
So now turn that to ourselves as this life that is expressing
Exactly.
through this form, existing prior to the coming into being
Without
of this
form.
form.
Formless.
Right. And will exist at the termination and the dissolution of this body, which is a form. You as life will subsist, will still exist. And we are supposed to be coming to know the life that we are, which is using this body as a form for purposes of expression, for purposes of enjoyment, for purposes of enjoying itself, for purposes of living. That's the purpose of our life. We're supposed to be doing that. But that's not going to happen if we don't engage in a meditative practice, which would allow you to have insight into the interiority of who you are as this life, expressing through this form. That's one of the things that happens when you engage in a meditation practice, because meditation also is a bardo. That's a Sanskrit term which means in between. That life is a continuum. It's something that always is, birth and death, living and dying, dead and alive. All of these things pertain to life. Life has no opposites as birth and death. Well, there are bardos that birth is a bardo and death is a bardo, and dream is also a bardo. It's an in-between. It is something that exists within, in between the continuum of life. Meditation is a bardo too, in that when you engage in the practice of meditation, you enter into an in-between space. Sometimes it is referred to as a gap. It is that which, upon which all things have their connectedness. And you are able now to see the connectedness of all things when you enter into the bardo of meditation. And something similar can happen to what happens when you have a lucid dream. When you enter into the bardo of the dream state, there can be a moment where you know that you're dreaming, and they call that lucid dreaming. And in some sense, the awakened principle of your consciousness have now become active in the dream state, and you are awake while you are sleeping in that dreaming. Well, when you meditate and you enter into the practice of meditation as a bardo, you can enter into a gap where now that awakened principle can take you to a level where you awaken in this awakened state, this wakeful state of consciousness that we think is all there is in terms of there to be experienced. This is really an asleep state to the deeper interiority of yourself as a spiritual being. We really have fallen asleep. As I said earlier, we have forgotten who we are as a spiritual being. And that forgetting is like a sleep that we are in. In the meditative state, you can have a lucid experience of awakening and waking up in this wakeful state. And more things will be made known to you that you cannot know through this ordinary waking state. There are other ways of knowing besides just perceiving, perception.
Through the senses.
Through the senses,
yeah.
Through just inference or through just analogy. There's intuitive knowing also. Scriptorial way of knowing is called valid testimony. It's really a valid testimony when it has come from those who have been a witness to the conditions that the scriptures speak of. And most people have a very different and wrong orientation of what the scriptorial teachings are referencing, because they are referencing higher states of consciousness. and the cosmology. And as you were speaking of earlier, earth without form, that's not talking about the earth that we know of. It's speaking about something metaphorically that's relating to a higher state of consciousness. But again, the orientation of people's understanding is kind of gravitated toward a left hemisphere way of making sense of things. So you miss the point. You miss getting,
because it's got to be logical, and it's got to be linear,
right?
And it's got to, the senses have got to validate it. You have to quantify it. You have to be able to measure it.
Right.
Otherwise, it does not exist. You cannot say anything is the substance of things unseen. If the things are unseen, they don't exist.
Right.
They have to be perceived with the senses. They've got to be smelled, touched, tasted, or heard in some way. They have got to be evident, because it cannot be evident if it is unseen.
Right. See,
it can't be on. You can't do it on faith. We
the
don't have enough time. We've got 2 minutes. Go ahead.
That's the only seeing. That's the only seeing that the average person is used to, in terms of becoming knowledgeable about his experience, the environment. But the inner seeing, the inside job of meditation, opens up the third eye, so that you can really see beyond just the senses. You don't need the senses for a validation of something as being real. You'll get to see that there's something spiritual, which is invisible, that is more real. It's not to be seen with the concrete external eyes. It is actually the reality, and what you're seeing as evidence is just the appearance of things. This is why they are transit. This is why they fall in, fall out, come in and out of existence. But that which sees all of this is who you are. And your purpose in life is for you to awaken to that reality, and then live out of the context of having awakened to that, which will express itself as love, compassion, supreme intelligence, all of the things reflected in a society of people that are not pathological, that are not left hemisphere orientated, are not Aristotelian logically inclined to think and reason things out, but to know that there is only one being experiencing itself in a variety of forms, not just human beings, but everything. This one singular reality is experiencing itself as creation, and we are supposed to awaken to ourselves as being that.
Know thyself.
Know thyself.
Well, you know, I was going to read a quote, but I don't have time to do it, and I wish we had more time, because I know that you can go on with this, and it certainly needs to be gone on with, because, you know, people will then ask about the process of meditation.
Right.
What is it that you do? And that's another show, isn't it? Part 2.
Yes.
Hotep.
Hotep.